In this presentation, you will learn all about English language proficiency scores. You will gain an understanding of what the scores mean and how to apply that knowledge to plan effective instruction for the English language learners in your classroom. Before we get started, please make sure you have the following materials as you will need them as we work through the presentation. You will need a copy of the WIDA Access Score Report for English language learners in your room. This may either be the official teacher report or an Excel spreadsheet of scores. You will need a copy of the 2007 WIDA Performance Definitions, which is 1 page. You will also need a copy of the 2012 WIDA Performance Definitions for speaking and writing and for listening and reading. Lastly, you will need a copy of the WIDA Can-Do descriptors for the grade level you teach. If you are missing any of these documents, pause this video and check with your ESOL teacher or visit our Edward M. Feligy ESOL site. First and foremost, how do students enroll in the ESOL program? Well, when any student registers for school, they must indicate whether they speak a language other than English at home or if they were born outside of the United States. If either of these are true, students are sent to the International Student Counseling Office, or ISCO. There they are given the WAPT, which is our placement test for ESOL. For kindergartners, if students score below a score of 29, they are enrolled in the ESOL program. For students in 1st through 5th grade, if they score an overall composite score below 5.0, they are enrolled in the ESOL program. Then every year, they take Access for ELLs, the yearly summative test for ESOL. Access tests students in the 4 language domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. This test determines students' eligibility to remain in the ESOL program. In order for students to exit the ESOL program and be considered reclassified English language learners, they must score an overall composite proficiency score of 5.0 or higher and a literacy composite score of 4.0 or higher. After students take the WIDA Access test in January and February, the school receives a score report around May or June. When looking at this report and the scores, make sure to note the date the test was taken. Inevitably, there will be a large time gap in between when the test was taken and when the scores are viewed. Be sure to ask yourself how far the student has progressed from the assessed level. On the score report, you will see an overall proficiency score between 1 and 6, as well as sub-test proficiency scores for listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Now, it is important to note that students in kindergarten will not have this report because they have not taken the summative assessment, only the WAPT placement test. Instead, they will have a score from 1 to 30. 1 to 10 indicates a beginning oral proficiency. 11 to 18, a mid-range oral proficiency. 19 to 28, a high oral proficiency. And students scoring a 29 or 30 have native-like proficiency, so they do not receive ESOL services. Now, what do all these scores mean? The first score to look at is the overall proficiency level, which can be between a 1 and a 6. 1 being a newcomer and 6 being a student with native-like language proficiency. Now let's look more closely at proficiency levels 1 and 2. A student with a proficiency level of 1 will be able to produce and understand pictorial or graphic representations of the language of the content areas. They will be able to understand words, phrases, or chunks of language when presented with one-step commands, directions, WH, choice, or yes-no questions or statements with sensory, graphic, or interactive support. They will be able to produce oral language with phonological, syntactic, or semantic errors that often impede meaning when presented with basic oral commands, direct questions, or simple statements with sensory, graphic, or interactive support. A student with a proficiency level 2 will be able to use and understand general language related to the content areas. They will be able to produce phrases or short sentences, and they will be able to produce oral or written language with phonological, syntactic, or semantic errors that often impede the meaning of the communication when presented with one to multi-step commands, directions, questions, or a series of statements with sensory, graphic, or interactive support. Now let's look at proficiency levels 3 and 4. A student with a proficiency level of 3 will be able to produce and understand general and some specific language of the content areas. They will be able to use expanded sentences in oral interaction or written paragraphs. They will be able to produce oral or written language with phonological, syntactic, or semantic errors that may impede the communication but retain much of its meaning when presented with oral or written, narrative or expository descriptions with sensory, graphic, or interactive support. A student with a proficiency level of 4 will be able to produce and understand specific and some technical language of the content areas. They will be able to use a variety of sentence lengths of varying linguistic complexity in oral discourse or multiple related sentences or paragraphs. They will be able to produce oral or written language with minimal phonological, syntactic, or semantic errors that do not impede the overall meaning of the communication when presented with oral or written connected discourse with sensory, graphic, or interactive support. Now let's look at proficiency levels 5 and 6. A student at a proficiency level 5 will be able to produce and understand specialized or technical language of the content areas. They will be able to use a variety of sentence lengths of varying linguistic complexity in extended oral or written discourse, including stories, essays, or reports. They will be able to produce oral or written language approaching comparability to that of English proficient peers when presented with grade-level material. And finally, a student with a proficiency level of 6 will be able to produce and understand specialized or technical language reflective of the content areas at grade level. They will be able to use a variety of sentence lengths of varying linguistic complexity in extended oral or written discourse as required by the specified grade level. They will be able to produce oral or written communication in English comparable to English proficient peers. Now that you understand the meaning of the overall proficiency levels, we can begin to look more closely at students' proficiency levels within each language domain. The 4 language domains are listening, speaking, reading, and writing. WIDA has created performance definitions for receptive skills, which are listening and reading, and productive skills, which are speaking and writing. Each language domain is broken into the discourse level, the sentence level, and the word or phrase level. The performance definitions describe what language English learners are able to process and produce toward the end of a given level of English language proficiency with instructional support. To read this information, find a student's subtest scores. What score do they have for listening, speaking, reading, and writing? Disregard the number after the decimal. For example, if a student has a score of 1.4 in listening, they would be considered a proficiency level 1 for listening. Look at the performance definition chart and choose the language domain you would like to learn more about. Then, find the corresponding proficiency level along the left-hand side. This will then tell you what students are able to process or produce at the discourse, sentence, and word or phrase level. Consider how you can use this information to inform your instruction and move students to the next proficiency level. The WIDA can-do descriptors provide additional detailed information on what students are able to process and produce at their particular grade level in terms of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. To read this information, First, find a student's subtest scores. What score do they have for listening, for speaking, for reading, for writing? Again, disregard the number after the decimal. For example, if a student has a score of 1.4 in listening, they would be considered a proficiency level 1 for listening. Look at the can-do descriptor chart for your grade level cluster and find the language domain along the left-hand side. Then find the score along the top. This will tell you what students can do within each language domain. Your goal is to push them to the next level over the course of the school year. How can you move a student listening at a proficiency level 1 to be able to listen at a proficiency level 2? Now that you have a better picture of where your students are in their language acquisition, you can plan instruction tailored to what they can do in terms of processing and producing language. The WIDA performance definitions and can-do descriptors really allow us to look at students' strengths. While our English learners are in the process of learning a second language, they all have strengths, and by utilizing their strengths during whole group and small group instruction, we can allow all students to have access to the grade level content. As you look at students' proficiency levels, consider how you can use this information and students' language strengths to plan for meaningful instruction. Thank you so much for listening. If you have additional questions on this topic, be sure to consult your ESOL teacher.